But the tests that are being envisioned possibly for the reliable replacement warhead, to my thinking, will be nowhere near the yields that we saw here. That would be accurate to say. Who knows? Who knows? Anyway, so moving into our next segment, and Phil Coyle has relocated from Washington after his tenure with the Clinton administration to Los Angeles with his wife Martha, and we became friends, and we worked together to bring attention to some of the problems with the ground-based interceptor as it was being developed, and Phil was a national spokesperson on that subject, and his authority is on so many subjects is quite vast. Every other week I seem to find that he's on another committee evaluating something having to do with either the safety of military protection for soldiers, or having something to do with nuclear weapons, or with the proposed missile defense system. And Phil was just telling me that there's yet another committee that he's been asked to sit on. He was on the base closure committee, the BRAC committee that met a few years ago. So Phil is a very a speaker very much requested, well requested, and we are looking forward to hearing from him talk about reliable replacement warheads. Phil, please.
Thanks, Jonathan. I appreciate your inviting me to come here this evening. I think it's important to see that footage that Peter had. People don't realize the tremendous power in nuclear weapons. I don't know if you remember, but when the war in Iraq first started, the most recent one, I don't know if you remember, but CNN did a really fascinating thing where they went out on the street and they asked people whether or not the United States should use nuclear weapons in Iraq. And they would stop young people on the street, and they don't remember any of this history that's in these films and other documentaries. And I was fascinated that their reaction, young people who were being asked this question, was kind of, well, yeah, it might be kind of interesting. You know, they were almost rubbing their hands together. Obviously they don't appreciate the power of these huge weapons. Next, please. So I'm going to talk this evening about the reliable replacement warhead. What is it? And how would it change U.S. nuclear weapons policy if the program goes ahead? Next, please. What it is it is a program to develop a new class of U.S. nuclear weapons, developed without underground nuclear testing, to replace those in the existing U.S. nuclear weapons stockpile, not overnight, gradually, and to build a new production complex across the country, involves facilities all across the country, to be able to build these new nuclear weapons. Next, please. This particular chart is from the U.S. Department of Energy, which is responsible for the nuclear weapons of the United States, left over from the atomic energy days. And in the upper right-hand side of this chart, they describe the situation today. You see a factory with a crack in it. It's generally acknowledged that the production complex that we have today is broken, and too many nuclear weapons on the right side. And again, this is a Department of Energy chart now, not mine. And they're proposing to transition to a new production complex, which doesn't have a crack in it anymore, and fewer nuclear weapons. And they show how that would go about from 2001 to the future in stages. And you'll notice that in addition to carrying fewer and fewer of the so-called legacy weapons in the stockpile forward, eventually they're all gone. They're all replaced by the reliable replacement warhead. But you'll see talk in there about capability to augment, to build new weapons, possibly for new missions. but there's an appealing piece to this, which is the number of U.S. nuclear weapons goes down. So you might say, well, what's wrong with that? Next slide, please. This is a STRATCOM chart, U.S. Strategic Command chart, and this is how they describe the program, the Reliable Replacement Warhead Program, going from aging platforms, aging weapon systems, 9 warhead types, rigid, highly optimized for their day, getting old, difficult to sustain, high risk, through this new capitalized infrastructure to new platforms, more accurate, more flexible weapons, fewer warhead types, fewer of them, more sustainable, manageable risk, and all the rest. Next, please. But all of those things there are aspects of that you might find quite appealing. The RRW was first funded at $9 million in fiscal 2005, which isn't very much money as things go. The request for fiscal 08, which is before the Congress now, is for almost $89 million for the Department of Energy for design and development, and $30 million for the Navy because it's been decided that the first RRW will go on the U.S. Navy Trident submarine-launched ballistic missiles. And through fiscal 2012, the total proposed budget for the program is $725 million, but that doesn't count the production complex. So compared to some defense spending, it's a relatively small amount of money. Recently, a week or so ago, I've lost track, a week or two ago, the House Appropriations Committee cut all of the President Bush's request for this. Republicans and Democrats alike, this was not simply a Democratic Congress initiative. Members of Congress on the Republican side were very skeptical about this program. And in the vote on June 6th, they also cut $25 million on this new nuclear weapons production complex, which is estimated to cost something like $150 billion or more over the next two decades. Well, where do we stand today? What's the situation today? You may recall that President Kennedy, back in 1960, not quite President Kennedy, this was during the campaign, predicted that by the end of the first term, 1964, there would be 10 or 15 or 20 nations with nuclear weapons. Certainly it's something to be concerned about, but as you'll see, next please, that didn't happen. His concerns were legitimate, but we don't have 10 or 15 or 20 countries with nuclear weapons. We have the original 5 on the left, and then Israel, India, Pakistan, and probably North Korea on the right. So that's the situation today. Certainly better than what President Kennedy was worried about. And some nations have abandoned nuclear weapons. So there is some hope there also. Argentina, Brazil, and so forth. South Africa, Iraq had a program, but they gave it up after the first Gulf War. And Libya, more recently, through some extraordinary diplomacy by the United Kingdom and Italy, the United States was treating Libya as a rogue nation and wasn't talking to them, and so we don't get much credit for this, but it was very good work by the United Kingdom and by